I've always liked mornings. Not the chaotic, alarm-blaring kind where you spill coffee on your shirt and trip over the cat on your way out the door. No, I mean the quiet ones, the kind where the world hasn't woken up yet, and all you hear is the soft hum of a distant lawnmower or the chirp of some bird that's probably late for its own meeting. That's my time. I shuffle out to the front yard in my slippers, cup of coffee in hand, steam curling up like it's trying to escape the mug. The air's cool, the grass is patchy, and my little slice of suburbia feels like it's mine alone. No neighbors yelling, no dogs barking, just me and the faint smell of whatever's growing or dying in my sad little flower bed. My house isn't much to brag about. It's one of those single-story jobs with faded beige siding and a roof that's one bad storm away from needing a full replacement. The front yard's a mess, half grass, half dirt, with a rusty barbecue grill shoved in the corner from the one time I tried to host a cookout 3 years ago. The only thing I've managed to keep alive is a single tomato plant out back, and even that's more of a survivor than a success. I don't have a fancy sprinkler system or one of those robot lawnmowers you see in ads. Just a plain green hose coiled up by the spigot, the kind you buy for $10 at the hardware store and forget about until it springs a leak. It's not a glamorous life, but it's mine, and I like it that way. So you can imagine my confusion 3 weeks ago when I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and found my yard looking like it had spent the night in a rainforest. The grass wasn't just damp. It was soaked, squishing under my slippers like a sponge. Puddles dotted the lawn, reflecting the gray morning sky, and the dirt patches had turned into a muddy soup that sucked at my toes. I stood there, blinking, steam still rising from my mug, trying to figure out what I was looking at. It hadn't rained. The forecast had been dry all week. I checked because I'd been meaning to water that tomato plant and kept putting it off. But here I was, staring at a swamp where my yard used to be. I took a sip of coffee, mostly to buy myself a second to think. Maybe a pipe burst? We'd had that happen down the street once, turned old Mr. Henderson's driveway into a fountain for a day. But there was no geyser here, no hissing water main, just a soggy mess. I sloshed over to the spigot on the side of the house, the one tucked under the gutter where I keep the hose. The ground around it was even wetter, like someone had hosted a kiddie pool party and forgotten to invite me. I bent down, careful not to spill my coffee, and that's when I noticed something weird. The hose wasn't just wet, it was warm. Not hot, like it had been baking in the sun, but warm, like it had been running water not long ago. I touched it again, just to be sure, and yeah, it felt alive, like it was still holding on to whatever it had been up to. Now, I live alone. No kids, no roommates, no secret garden gnomes sneaking around with tiny watering cans for their underground villages. It's just me, my coffee, and that half-dead tomato plant I keep promising to tend. I don't even have a cat to blame for knocking stuff over. So who, or what, had turned my yard into a wetland preserve? I straightened up, scanning the street. It was still early, maybe 6:30, and the neighborhood was dead quiet. Mrs. Carter's blinds were shut tight across the way. Glenn's pickup was still parked crooked in his driveway, and the new lady's house, Karen something or other, had that giant sun hat of hers hanging on the porch like a trophy. Nothing out of place, nothing suspicious. Just a wet lawn and a warm host staring back at me like they knew something I didn't. My first thought was maybe I'd sleepwalked. I've seen those shows where people cook entire meals or drive cars in their sleep, so watering the yard didn't seem that far-fetched. But I don't sleepwalk. At least, I don't think I do, and I'm pretty sure I'd remember dragging a hose around at midnight. Plus, I'd gone to bed early the night before, zonked out after watching some documentary about penguins. No late-night gardening adventures here. I took another sip of coffee, letting the caffeine kick my brain into gear. Maybe it was a prank. Teenagers, bored and looking for a laugh, sneaking around with buckets or something. But that didn't explain the hose being warm. Buckets don't heat up plastic. I decided to investigate. I set my mug on the porch step, careful not to let it tip over, because I'm not a monster, and shuffled over to the spigot. The metal was damp, a few droplets clinging to it like they were in on the secret. I turned it, just a little, to see if it was loose or leaking. Nothing. Bone dry. I turned it back, frowning. The hose itself was still coiled up, sloppy like always, but the end, the nozzle part, was dripping. Not a lot. Just enough to make a tiny puddle under it. I picked it up, and sure enough, it felt heavier than usual, like it was still holding water inside. I gave it a shake, and a few drops splattered out onto the mud. Okay, so it had definitely been used. But by who? I glanced around again, half expecting to see some clue, a footprint, a dropped candy wrapper, a neon sign saying gotcha. Nada. The street was still asleep, the only sound the faint drip-drip from the hose. I scratched my head, starting to feel less curious and more annoyed. This wasn't just weird, it was inconvenient. My slippers were soaked now, the kind of wet that seeps into your socks and makes you regret ever leaving the house. I trudged back to the porch, grabbed my coffee, and stood there, staring at the mess. The puddles were already soaking into the dirt, turning my yard into a patchy, muddy disaster. If this kept up, I'd have to start charging admission for the neighborhood swamp tour. That's when I noticed the water meter, tucked near the side of the house behind a scraggly bush I keep forgetting to trim. I don't check it often, why would I? But something made me wander over. I pushed the bush aside, squinting at the little dials. They were spinning, slow but steady, like the thing was keeping a secret tally. I'm no plumber, but I know enough to figure that meant water had been used, recently. I pulled out my phone and snapped a quick picture, mostly so I'd have proof I wasn't losing it. The bill wasn't due for another week, but I made a mental note to check it. If someone was messing with my water, they were messing with my wallet, and that's where I draw the line. Back inside, I kicked off my soggy slippers and poured a fresh cup of coffee, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the wet lawn or the warm hose, it was the why of it all. I don't have enemies. I don't feud with neighbors or leave passive-aggressive notes about trash cans. I'm the guy who waves at the mailman and forgets to mow the lawn until it's a jungle. So why my yard? Why my hose? I sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the puddles glinting in the rising sun, and decided I'd figure it out. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Because if there's one thing I don't like, it's a mystery that soaks my socks and ruins my coffee time. A few days after the soggy lawn incident, I'd almost convinced myself it was a fluke. Maybe a freak-due storm hit my yard and nobody else's. Maybe the hose got warm from some weird science thing I didn't understand, solar flares or something. I'm not a meteorologist or a physicist, just a guy who likes his coffee black and his mornings quiet. So I let it go, sort of. I kept an eye on the yard, but it stayed dry, and my slippers got a break from their swamp adventure. Life went back to normal, or at least my version of it, which mostly means puttering around the house, avoiding yard work, and wondering if that tomato plant out back was plotting revenge for all the times I forgot to water it. Then the water bill showed up. It came in one of those plain white envelopes with the utility company's logo stamped on it, the kind you usually toss on the counter and forget about until the due date sneaks up. I grabbed it from the mailbox on my way in from the grocery store. Nothing fancy, just bread, milk, and a discount pack of frozen pizzas, and slid it open while I unpacked. I wasn't expecting much. My water bill's usually boring, like clockwork. $50, give or take, enough to cover my showers, the occasional dishwashing, and that one time a month I remember the tomato plant exists. But this time, when I unfolded the paper, the number hit me like a slap. $167. I blinked, figuring I'd read it wrong. Nope. There it was in bold black ink. $167.43, due in 2 weeks. I set the milk down on the counter, forgetting to shove it in the fridge, and stared at the bill like it was a riddle. My first thought was a mistake. Maybe they'd swapped my meter with some guy who runs a car wash in his garage. I flipped the paper over, looking for one of those oops, we goofed notices, but it was just the usual breakdown. Usage in gallons, rate per unit, a little graph that looked like a toddler drew it. The graph was the kicker. It showed a spike, a big one, starting right around the time my yard turned into a puddle party. I grabbed my phone, pulled up last month's bill from the app, $48.22, and compared them side by side. The numbers didn't lie. Something had guzzled enough water to triple my usual tab, and it wasn't me. I don't have a pool. I don't wash my car every day. I barely wash it at all, unless you count rain as a car wash. I don't even own one of those fancy pressure washers people use to blast dirt off their decks. It's just me, living small and simple, and yet here I was, apparently funding a secret water park. I tossed the bill on the table and paced the kitchen, the milk sweating on the counter while I tried to piece it together. The wet lawn, the warm hose, the dripping nozzle. It wasn't a one-time thing. This was a pattern, and it was hitting me right in the wallet. I'm not cheap, but I don't like paying for stuff I didn't use. That's not how the world's supposed to work. I decided to do some digging, but not the high-tech kind. I'm no detective with a magnifying glass and a trench coat, just a guy with soggy slippers and a hunch. So I took a walk around the block that afternoon, casual-like, pretending I was just stretching my legs. The neighborhood's your typical suburban sprawl, rows of houses that all look vaguely the same, picket fences here and there, a couple of kids' bikes tipped over in driveways. I waved at Mrs. Carter, who was fussing with her roses across the street. She's in her 70s, sweet as pie, but deaf as a post unless you shout. "Hey, Mrs. C," I called. "You notice anything weird with your water lately?" She cupped a hand to her ear, squinting at me through her bifocals. "What's that, dear?" I repeated it louder, and she shook her head. No, my bill's the same as always." "Why, you got a leak?" I shrugged, said maybe, and moved on. Next was Glenn, 2 houses down. He's a quiet guy, mid-40s, always tinkering with that beat-up pickup of his. I found him under the hood, a wrench in hand, grease smeared on his cheek. "Hey, Glenn," I said, leaning against his mailbox. "Your water bill been normal this month?" He poked his head out, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, pretty much." "What?" I told him about my yard, the puddles, the bill. He frowned, scratching his beard. "That's odd. You got sprinklers or something?" I shook my head. "Just a hose." He chuckled. "Maybe it's that new lady, Karen, right? Saw her poking around your side of the street the other day, dragging something. Figured she was gardening." My ears perked up, but I played it cool. "Huh, maybe. Thanks, man." He nodded and went back to his engine. Karen. The name clicked like a puzzle piece I didn't know I was missing. She'd moved in a couple months back, right across the street, into the house with the bright blue shutters that used to belong to a nice old couple who moved to Florida. I hadn't talked to her much, just a wave here and there, but I'd seen her around. Hard not to. She's the type who makes an entrance without trying. Loud floral blouses that look like they're screaming for attention, a sun hat so big it could double as a beach umbrella, and this clipboard she carries like it's her royal scepter. She'd been on a tear since day one, knocking on doors, introducing herself with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and handing out friendly suggestions like she owned the place. I'd heard she'd already complained to the HOA about Mrs. Carter's roses being too thorny, and told Glenn his truck was an eyesore. The woman had a knack for stirring the pot, and now Glenn's offhand comment had me wondering if she was stirring something else, namely, my water supply. Back home, I grabbed the bill again, staring at that $167.43 like it was taunting me. I pulled up the water meter picture from my phone, zooming in on those spinning dials. Then I went outside, coffee long forgotten, and checked the meter again. Still ticking, slow but steady, even though I hadn't turned a faucet all day. I stood there, hands on my hips, the afternoon sun beating down on my neck. Karen's house loomed across the street, quiet for once. No clipboard, no hat, just those blue shutters glaring back at me. Could she really be the one? Sneaking over, using my hose like it was her personal fountain? It sounded crazy. She'd only been here a couple months, and who steals water anyway? But the more I thought about it, the less crazy it felt. I went inside, grabbed a notebook from the junk drawer, and jotted down what I knew. Wet lawn, warm hose, spiked bill, Karen spotted near my yard. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a start. I'm not the confrontational type. I don't yell, I don't storm over with a pitchfork. I solve problems, quiet and steady, like fixing a leaky faucet or coaxing that tomato plant back from the brink. If Karen was behind this, I'd figure it out. Not today, though. Today I'd watch. I'd wait. Because if there's one thing I've learned from living alone in this sleepy little neighborhood, it's that secrets don't stay buried forever, especially not when they're leaving puddles on my lawn. By the time Saturday rolled around, I was done guessing. The wet lawn, the warm hose, that $167.43 water bill. They'd been gnawing at me all week like a splinter I couldn't pull out. I'd spent my evenings peering out the window at odd hours, half expecting to catch some shadowy figure sneaking around with my hose. But the yard stayed dry and quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I wasn't sleeping great either. Kept waking up thinking I heard the spigot squeak or the hose dragging across the grass. Probably just my brain playing tricks, but it was enough to make me twitchy. I needed answers, and I wasn't about to wait for the next bill to confirm I was funding someone else's private splash zone. Normally, Saturdays are sacred. I hit the grocery store early, bread, coffee, maybe a bag of chips if I'm feeling wild. Then spend the day tinkering with something useless, like reorganizing the garage or pretending I'll finally fix that wobbly kitchen chair. But this Saturday, I scrapped the routine. No grocery run, no chair. I was on a mission. If someone was using my water, they'd have to do it eventually, and I'd be ready. I brewed a double batch of coffee, grabbed my notebook, and set up camp by the living room window. The blinds were cracked just enough to see the spigot without being obvious. No point in scaring off the culprit before I had proof. I wasn't sure what I expected. A rogue landscaper? A thirsty raccoon with opposable thumbs? Karen with her clipboard and that ridiculous sun hat? I'd find out soon enough. The morning dragged. I sat there, sipping coffee that went cold faster than I could drink it, scribbling nonsense in my notebook to stay awake. Doodles of hoses and little stick figure Karens with devil horns. The street was lazy, same as always. Mrs. Carter shuffled out to check her mailbox, moving like she had all year to get there. Glenn's pickup rumbled to life for 10 minutes before he killed the engine and went back inside, probably to argue with it later. A kid on a scooter zipped by, nearly wiping out on the curb. Normal stuff. My yard stayed dry, the hose coiled up by the spigot like it was mocking me. I was starting to think I'd wasted my day when it happened. Right around 10:15, just as the sun climbed high enough to make the puddles from last time a distant memory. I heard it before I saw it. A faint squeak, metal on metal, the sound of the spigot turning. My head snapped up so fast I nearly spilled the coffee mug on my lap. Through the blinds, I saw her, Karen, in all her glory. She strutted across the street like she owned it, floral blouse flapping in the breeze, that sun hat perched on her head like a crown. No clipboard this time, but her hands weren't empty. She marched straight to my spigot, grabbed the hose, and started unraveling it with the confidence of someone who'd done it 100 times. I froze, mouth half open, watching her drag it back toward her yard like it was her personal property. She didn't even glance around. No sneaking, no shame, just pure, unfiltered entitlement in broad daylight. I leaned closer to the window, nose practically pressed against the glass, as she hooked the hose up to a portable pressure washer parked on her driveway. It was one of those fancy ones, all shiny red plastic with a nozzle that looked like it could strip paint off a car. She fiddled with it for a second, then turned the spigot full blast. Water shot out, my water, spraying her front porch in wide, lazy arcs. She aimed it at the railing, the steps, even the welcome mat that said "Bless this mess" in curly script. She was cleaning, full-on scrubbing down her house like it was spring cleaning day, and I was footing the bill. I sat there, dumbfounded, coffee forgotten, as she worked her way across the porch, humming some tune I couldn't hear but could imagine was obnoxiously cheerful. Then she saw me. I must have shifted the blinds or something, because her head snapped up and those sharp little eyes locked onto mine through the window. For half a second, I thought she'd dropped the hose and bolt, caught in the act. Nope. She grinned, big, toothy, fake as a plastic flower, and waved at me like we were old pals. "Hope you don't mind," she shouted over the hiss of the water. "Just a quick rinse." Before I could even process that, she turned back to her porch, blasting away at a spot that didn't even look dirty. A quick rinse. Like she was borrowing a cup of sugar, not hijacking my water supply for a full-on spa day. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. My hands gripped the mug so tight I thought it might crack, but I didn't move. Not yet. I just watched, letting it sink in. This wasn't a prank or a glitch or a raccoon with a hose fetish. It was Karen, plain as day, stealing my water like it was her God-given right. The nerve of it, the sheer, shameless nerve, lit something in me. Not anger, not exactly. More like a slow burn, a mix of disbelief and the kind of irritation you feel when someone cuts in line and then brags about it. I set the mug down, grabbed my phone, and snapped a blurry picture through the blinds. It wasn't great. Half her hat was cut off, but it was evidence. Proof I wasn't imagining this. She finished up maybe 10 minutes later, spraying down her porch chairs for good measure before shutting off the spigot. She coiled the hose back up, sloppier than I'd left it, naturally, and strutted back to her house, pressure washer in tow. I waited until she was inside, then bolted out to check the damage. The yard wasn't soaked this time, but the grass near the spigot was damp, and the hose was warm again, heavier than it should have been. I stood there, hands on my hips, staring at her house across the street. Those blue shutters looked smug now, like they were in on the scam. I couldn't let it slide. Not after that. So I marched over, still in my Saturday sweatpants, and knocked on her door. She answered quick, sun hat off, hair pinned up like she'd just stepped out of a magazine shoot. "Oh, hi," she chirped, like I'd popped by for tea. "What's up?" I kept it calm, barely. "Hey, Karen, I saw you using my hose. Mind not doing that? It's kind of spiking my bill." She laughed, a sharp little bark, and waved a hand. "Oh, that. Your hose has way better pressure than mine. I figured you wouldn't mind. Neighbors share, right?" She tilted her head, smiling that fake smile again. "Anyway, it's just water. No big deal." I opened my mouth to argue, but she was already shutting the door. "See you around," she called. And then it was just me and her, bless this mess, Matt, staring at each other. I walked back home, jaw tight, the slow burn turning into something hotter. No big deal. Tell that to my wallet. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out my notebook, and added a new line. "Karen, hose thief. Caught on camera." This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She'd waved at me like it was nothing, but she'd just started something she didn't even know yet. After catching Karen with my hose, I wasn't about to let it slide. That wave and just a quick rinse line kept replaying in my head, like a bad jingle you can't shake. She'd turned my water into her personal playground, and I was done being the nice guy who waves back while his bill climbs higher than a kite. I'm not the type to bang on doors or start shouting matches. Never have been. I fix things quiet and practical, like patching a hole in the wall or rigging a fan when the AC quits. So I figured I'd fix this too, starting with something simple. If Karen wanted my hose, I'd make sure she couldn't get it. Monday morning, I hit the hardware store. It's a little place a few blocks over, smells like sawdust and motor oil, run by a guy named Pete who's got a beard like a wizard and advice for everything. I wandered the aisles, past shiny tools I'd never use and bins of screws I'd lose the second I got home, until I found it. A hose lock. Nothing fancy, just a cheap metal clamp that bolts over the spigot, with a padlock to keep it shut. $10, plus a $5 lock from the clearance rack. I showed it to Pete at the counter. "Think this'll stop someone from using my hose?" I asked. He scratched his beard, eyeing it like it was a science project. "Depends on how determined they are. Bolt cutters'll take it off, but most folks won't bother." I nodded. Karen didn't strike me as the bolt cutter type, too busy with her clipboard and sun hat. I paid and headed home, feeling like I'd just bought peace of mind. That afternoon, I installed it. Took me 10 minutes, mostly because I dropped the screwdriver twice and had to fish it out of the muddy patch by the spigot. The lock clicked into place, snug and solid, the hose coiled up beside it like a dog on a leash. I stepped back, hands on my hips, and gave it a nod. "Try stealing that now," I muttered, half to myself, half to Karen's house across the street. Those blue shutters stared back, silent but smug. I went inside, brewed a fresh coffee, and figured that was that. Problem solved. No more puddles, no more warm hose, no more $167 surprises. I even slept better that night, the kind of sleep where you don't wake up wondering if your yard's turned into a swamp again. Tuesday morning, I was wrong. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy my victory lap, and stopped dead. The lock was gone. Not unlocked, not broken, gone. The spigot sat there naked, a clean cut through the metal clamp like someone had sliced butter with a hot knife. The hose was wet, dripping at the nozzle, and the grass around it was damp enough to squish under my slippers. I stood there, mug steaming in the cool air, staring at the crime scene. "Bolt cutters." Pete's words echoed back, and I cursed under my breath. Karen wasn't just determined, she was a step ahead. I glanced across the street. Her SUV gleamed in the driveway, freshly washed, water beads still clinging to the hood. No proof it was her, not yet, but my gut knew. My gut was screaming. I didn't confront her, not then. I was too mad, and I don't trust myself when I'm mad. Instead, I went practical again. If she wouldn't stop, maybe the HOA would make her. I'd heard horror stories about HOAs, finding people for pink flamingos or grass 2 inches too tall. But this was different. This was theft, plain and simple, and I had a case. I grabbed my phone, snapped pictures of the cut lock and wet hose, then dug out the water bill and that blurry photo from Saturday. I typed up an email, keeping it short and polite. "Neighbors using my hose without permission. Bills tripled. Here's proof. Can you help?" I attached everything and hit send, feeling like I'd just filed a report with the suburban FBI. The HOA's website promised a response within 48 hours. I figured I'd hear back by Thursday, maybe with a stern letter for Karen to knock it off. While I waited, she struck again. Wednesday afternoon, I was in the kitchen microwaving a pizza when I heard it. The hiss of water, faint but unmistakable. I bolted to the window, pizza forgotten, and there she was. Karen, in yoga pants and that sun hat, dragging my hose across the street like it was her birthright. This time, she wasn't pressure washing. She'd hooked it to a kiddie pool, a bright blue plastic thing with cartoon fish on it, filling it up in her front yard. Water splashed over the sides as she adjusted the nozzle, spraying her roses for good measure. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and recorded it through the glass. She didn't even look my way, just kept at it, bold as brass, until the pool was full. Then she shut off the spigot, waved the hose at me like a taunt, and hauled it back, leaving it in a sloppy pile. I watched the video 3 times, zooming in on her smug little grin. That was it, proof, clear as day. I added it to my HOA file, but Thursday came and went with no reply. Friday morning, I checked my email. There it was, buried under spam about gutter cleaning. Thank you for your concern. At this time, we encourage all neighbors to resolve minor disputes amicably without HOA intervention. That was it. No, we'll investigate. No, stop stealing water, Karen. Just a fancy way of saying, figure it out yourself. I stared at the screen, coffee going cold again, feeling like I'd been slapped with a wet noodle. The HOA, supposed guardians of neighborhood harmony, had just shrugged and left me to drown. I wasn't done, though. If the HOA wouldn't help, I'd lean on the neighborhood. I ran into Glenn later that day, out by his truck with a beer in hand. Hey, man, I said, nodding toward Karen's house. She's been using my hose. Caught her twice now. You ever deal with her? He snorted, taking a swig. Oh yeah. Tried to find me once, 'cause my wind chimes were too loud. Said they disrupted her meditation. She's a piece of work. He paused, squinting at me. You lock your hose? I told him about the bolt cutters. His eyes widened. Damn, she's hardcore. Watch your back. She's got a knack for getting her way. I nodded, filing that away. Glenn wasn't the only one with a Karen story, either. Mrs. Carter had grumbled about her once, something about thorny roses being a safety hazard. Sounded like Karen had enemies. She just didn't know it yet. Back home, I sat at the table, staring at the cut lock I'd fished out of the trash. The HOA was useless, Karen was unstoppable, and my water bill was climbing by the day. I wasn't yelling yet. I don't yell, but I was close. That video of her with the kiddie pool burned in my mind, her little wave like a middle finger. She thought she'd won, thought I'd roll over. She didn't know me. I don't escalate, I solve. And I was about to solve this, one way or another. The lock was gone, the HOA was a bust, but I had a phone full of footage and a head full of ideas. Karen wanted water? She'd get it, just not the way she expected. Karen's little wave with my hose, the one she'd used to fill that kiddie pool like she was hosting a backyard water park, lit a fire under me. Not the raging, punch-a-wall kind of fire. I don't do that. Mine's quieter, slower, the kind that simmers until it boils over into something clever. The HOA had flaked, the lock was a bust, and my water bill was still laughing at me from the kitchen counter. I wasn't about to knock on her door again. Last time, she'd practically patted me on the head and shut me out. No, I needed something better. Something she couldn't ignore or cut with bolt cutters. That's when it hit me. A camera. If I couldn't stop her, I'd catch her. Hard proof, undeniable, right in her smug little face. I didn't have a fancy security system lying around. My budget's more discount pizza than high-tech surveillance. But I'd seen those little motion-activated cameras online, the kind people use to spy on package thieves or raccoons raiding their trash. Small, cheap, and easy to hide. Perfect. I ordered one that afternoon, $1.30, next day shipping, and spent the evening plotting. The spigot was the target, tucked under the gutter on the side of the house. I'd stick the camera up high, angled just right, where Karen wouldn't spot it unless she brought a ladder. Which, knowing her, wasn't out of the question, but I'd take the risk. It showed up the next day, a tiny black box no bigger than a deck of cards, with a sticky mount and a battery that promised 2 weeks of juice. I waited until dusk, less chance of nosy neighbors asking questions, then grabbed a stepladder from the garage. The thing was rickety, wobbling under me like it resented being used, but I made it work. I stuck the camera under the gutter, hidden in the shadow of the overhang, lens pointed at the spigot and hose. I synced it to my phone with an app that beeped every time it caught motion, then tested it. I turned the spigot on, waved the hose around like a lunatic, and checked the footage. Crystal clear, me in my sweatpants, flailing like an idiot, time-stamped and all. Good enough. I coiled the hose back up, left it tempting by the spigot, and went inside. Trap set. For 2 days, nothing. The app stayed quiet. No beeps, no blurry raccoons or sneaky Karens. I started to think she'd gotten bored. Maybe she'd found someone else's hose to steal, or her kiddie pool had sprung a leak. I kept busy, trimming the tomato plant. It glared at me like I owed it an apology, and avoiding the water bill still mocking me on the table. Then, early Friday morning, 5:47 a.m., according to the app, my phone buzzed. I jolted awake, fumbling for it in the dark, heart pounding like I'd caught a burglar. The screen glowed with a notification, motion detected. I opened the app, and there she was. Karen, in all her pre-dawn glory, creeping into my yard like a cartoon villain. No sun hat this time, just a hoodie and those loud floral leggings she wore like a uniform. The footage was sharp, even in the dim light, catching every move. She glanced around, finally showing a shred of guilt, maybe, then grabbed the hose and dragged it across the street. I switched to live view, holding my breath as she hooked it to her spigot. First, she watered her roses, spraying them like they'd personally offended her. Then she hauled out that kiddie pool again, filling it to the brim until water sloshed over the cartoon fish. But she didn't stop there. Oh no. She grabbed a bucket, filled it, and started washing her yappy little terrier, who yipped and splashed like it was auditioning for a dog shampoo ad. A full Karen production, all before the sun was even up, and every drop was mine. I watched, jaw on the floor, as she finished up, dumping the soapy bucket water on her driveway, shutting off the spigot, and tossing my hose back in a sloppy heap. She even smirked, a quick flash of teeth caught on camera, before disappearing inside. The app saved it all, 6 minutes of pure, entitled chaos. I played it back 3 times, zooming in on that smirk, feeling a mix of fury and triumph. I had her, not just a blurry wave or a hunch, undeniable, time-stamped proof. She couldn't talk her way out of this one, not with her dog's sudsy fur and that pool glinting in the dawn light. I didn't confront her, not yet. I had a better idea. I trimmed the video down to the juiciest bits, roses, pool, dog, and posted it to the neighborhood Facebook group. Title: Neighbor steals my water every morning. No names, no accusations, just the footage and a line. Anyone else dealing with this? I hit post, leaned back, and waited. Within an hour, the comments exploded. Mrs. Carter's daughter typed, "Is that Karen? She told my mom her roses were a hazard." Glenn chimed in, "Same one who hates my wind chimes. Get a motion sprinkler, spray her back." Someone else posted a laughing emoji, and this is wild. By noon, it had 50 likes, 20 shares, and a guy offering to send me a link for a prank sprinkler that shoots intruders with dye. The neighborhood was buzzing, and Karen didn't even know it yet. She found out soon enough. That afternoon, I was watering my tomato plant, legally, with my own hose, when she stormed over. No hat, no smile, just rage. Her floral blouse was wrinkled, like she'd been stewing all day. "You think you're clever?" she snapped, arms crossed so tight I thought she'd pop a button. "Posting that video, violating my privacy, ruining my reputation?" I kept watering, calm as I could. "You're on my property, using my water. That's not private, that's theft." She huffed, cheeks red. "It's a hose, not a bank account. You're making a hostile environment over nothing." I turned off the spigot, looked her dead in the eye. "Nothing? Tell that to my bill." She glared, then threw out the dumbest thing yet. "Do something about it. I dare you." She stomped off, leaving me standing there, hose dripping in my hand. That dare hung in the air, heavy and sharp, like she'd tossed me a gauntlet instead of a tantrum. I didn't yell back. I don't yell. But inside, something clicked. She thought she'd won. Thought I'd back down like the HOA or shrug it off like Glenn with his wind chimes. She didn't get it. I don't escalate. I solve. And that video, those comments, that dare, they were fuel. I went inside, replayed the footage one more time. Her smirk, her dog, her pool. and smiled. She wanted me to do something? Oh, I would. Something she'd never see coming, something she'd never forget. Karen's dare hit me like a spark on dry grass. Do something about it, she'd said, tossing it out with that smug huff like she was untouchable, like I was just some pushover with a soggy lawn and a fat water bill. She didn't know me. I don't yell, I don't storm around waving fists, I solve things. Quietly, methodically, like figuring out why the fridge hums too loud or how to keep that tomato plant from keeling over. But this wasn't a leaky pipe or a wilted plant. This was war, suburban style, and her little taunt flipped a switch in me I didn't even know I had. She wanted something done? Fine. I'd do something. Something epic. I spent that evening pacing the kitchen, coffee cold on the counter, brain spinning like a hamster on a wheel. The video was gold. Half the neighborhood was still laughing about it on Facebook, but it wasn't enough. She'd shrugged it off, dared me to escalate, and I couldn't just sit there coiling my hose tighter while she pressure-washed her way through my paycheck. I needed a counterattack, something she couldn't bolt-cutter her way out of. I grabbed my notebook, already scribbled with Karen, hose thief, and stick figure doodles, and started brainstorming. Die in the water? Tempting. Imagine her porch glowing neon pink, but too messy, and I'd probably stain my own yard. A fake, toxic waste sign by the spigot? Funny, but she'd just ignore it and complain to the HOA about visual clutter. I needed impact, something poetic, something smellier. That's when the idea hit. I'd driven past a construction site a few blocks over the other day, new condos going up, all dirt piles and orange cones. They had one of those big portable sewage tanks parked out front, the kind that looks like a dumpster's uglier cousin, hooked up to a pump for whatever gross stuff they were flushing out. Sewage. Not just water. Nasty, stinky, unforgettable sewage. If Karen loved my host so much, why not give her a taste of something special? I laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen, picturing her spraying her roses with sludge and shrieking like a banshee. It was awful. It was brilliant. It was perfect. I didn't jump in blind. I'm not that reckless. First, I had to scope it out. The next morning, I took a detour on my way to grab coffee, cruising past the site in my beat-up sedan. The tank was still there, squat and gray, humming faintly with a hose snaking out the back. A couple of workers in hard hats milled around, one smoking a cigarette, the other kicking a rock like he was bored out of his skull. I parked across the street, pretending to check my phone, and watched. No security cameras, no padlocks on the tank, just a keep-out sign that looked more like a suggestion than a rule. I could work with this. I needed access, though, not to steal the tank, just to borrow its contents. Time to get creative. I stepped out, coffee cup in hand as a prop, and ambled over like I belonged. The smoker glanced up, squinting through a cloud of nicotine. Hey, I said, casual as I could. You guys doing drainage stuff? I'm a homeowner down the street. Got some irrigation trouble. He shrugged, flicking ash. Yeah, this beast handles the nasty stuff. Why, you need one? I laughed, scratching my neck. Maybe. Mind if I take a look? Thinking of rigging something for my yard. The other guy wandered over, rock still in hand. It's just a pump and a tank, he said, bored. Sucks up crap, spits it out. What's your problem? I spun a quick lie. Something about a flooded basement and testing flows. They didn't care much, just nodded like I was wasting their smoke break. I slipped the smoker a crumpled $20, keeping it low-key. For your trouble. Just need one night to mess with it. He pocketed it, grinning. Long as you don't break the pump, I don't give a damn. Jackpot. Back home, I got to work. I dug through the garage, past the ladder, a box of old Christmas lights, and a tire pump I'd forgotten I owned, until I found what I needed. A spare hose, some duct tape, and a rusty wrench. The plan was simple but genius. I'd run a second line from the spigot, bury it shallow under the grass, and connect it to the sewage tank a block away. A little adapter I'd rig up would let me switch between clean water and the good stuff. Karen wouldn't know until it was too late. The main hose would look normal, coiled and innocent, but when she turned it on, surprise. I spent the afternoon tinkering, twisting the wrench until my hands ached, taping joints so they wouldn't leak. By nightfall, I had it. A Frankenstein setup, ugly but functional, hidden under a thin layer of dirt and some strategically placed rocks. I couldn't test it live, not yet. Dragging a sewage line across the neighborhood at midnight would raise too many eyebrows, even for me. So I improvised. I hooked the spare hose to a bucket in the backyard, filled it with a mix of muddy water and some leftover fertilizer from the garage. Stinky, but not toxic. I flipped the switch on my adapter, turned the spigot, and held my breath. A gurgle, a sputter, then a jet of brown muck shot out, splattering the bucket and kicking up a smell like a swamp on a bad day. I gagged, waving it off, but grinned through it. It worked. The real stuff would be worse. Way worse, and Karen wouldn't see it coming. I shut it down, rinsed the hose with clean water, and dragged everything back inside, the stench lingering on my shoes like a trophy. Lying in bed that night, I couldn't sleep, not from nerves, but excitement. The camera was still up, the app ready to beep when she struck again. The hose sat by the spigot, a baited trap, looking normal as ever. I pictured her grabbing it, hooking it to her pressure washer or that stupid pool, turning the knob with that smirk of hers. Then, bam, sewage city. Roses ruined, porch trashed, dog howling. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt. Only a twinge. She'd dared me, after all. She'd stolen my water, cut my lock, laughed in my face. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice, served cold and stinky. I closed my eyes, still smiling, and drifted off to the sound of imaginary screams. Tomorrow, or the next day, whenever she took the bait, I'd be ready. Karen wanted water? She was about to get the ride of her life. The trap was set, and I was buzzing like a kid on Christmas Eve. Not the jittery, nervous kind of buzz, more the quiet thrill of knowing something big was coming, something I'd built with my own hands and a little borrowed sewage. I'd spent the night before double-checking everything. The adapter was snug, the spare hose buried under a thin layer of dirt, snaking through backyards and bushes to the construction site a block away. I'd even sweet-talked the smoker again. Another $10 to keep the tank's pump unplugged overnight, just in case. The main hose sat coiled by the spigot, looking innocent as ever, a perfect lure for Karen's sticky fingers. All I had to do was wait. She'd strike again. She couldn't help herself, and when she did, I'd have front-row seats via the camera app. I didn't sleep much. Kept checking my phone, half expecting the app to beep at 3 a.m. with her sneaking around in that sun hat like a floral ninja. Nothing. Dawn came, gray and quiet, and I dragged myself out of bed, coffee in hand, ready to play the long game. I parked by the window again, blinds cracked, app open on my lap. The neighborhood woke up slow, Mrs. Carter shuffling to her roses, Glenn's truck coughing to life, then dying again. My yard stayed dry, the hose untouched, mocking me with its stillness. I started to wonder if she'd gotten wind of the video, if she'd backed off. Then, at 10:32 a.m., the app buzzed. Motion detected. My heart jumped. Showtime. I opened the live feed, and there she was, Karen, bold as ever, strutting into my yard like she owned it. No hoodie this time, just yoga pants, a loud pink tank top, and a grin that said she thought she'd won. She didn't even glance at the camera. I'd hidden it too well. She grabbed the hose, dragged it across the street, and hooked it to a new toy. A fancy rotating sprinkler, the kind that spins in wide circles and costs more than my monthly grocery bill. She plopped it dead center on her lawn, aimed the spigot, and turned it on full blast. I held my breath, fingers hovering over the adapter switch I'd rigged to my phone. One tap, and the clean water would flip to sewage. I waited, just a second, to make sure she was committed. Water sprayed out, clear at first, luring her in. She adjusted the sprinkler, smug as ever. I tapped the switch. It wasn't instant. There was a gurgle, a weird hiccup in the hose, like it was clearing its throat. Karen tilted her head, confused, stepping closer. Then it hit. Bam! A thick, dark jet of sewage blasted out, spinning wild with the sprinkler's rotation. Brown sludge arced across her lawn, splattering the grass, the patio, and her precious white wicker furniture like a Jackson Pollock painting gone wrong. The smell hit next. I couldn't smell it through the phone, thank God, but I saw her face twist, mouth gaping in a silent scream as the stench slammed her. She slipped, arms flailing, and landed on her butt in the muck, the sprinkler still spinning, dousing her shins with a fresh coat of filth. I bit my lip to keep from laughing, watching the chaos unfold in glorious 4K. She scrambled up, shrieking loud enough to wake the dead. High-pitched, panicked, the kind of scream that'd make dogs howl a mile away. "What is this?" she yelled, slipping again as the lawn turned into a smelly swamp. Neighbors poked their heads out. Mrs. Carter dropped her pruning shears, jaw slack. Glenn stepped onto his porch, coffee in hand, and just stared like he couldn't believe it. A kid on a scooter, Tommy, from 3 houses down, rolled up, wide-eyed, and shouted, "It's a poop fountain," before pedaling off, cackling. Poop fountain. I snorted, filing that away. Karen wrestled the hose, yanking it from the sprinkler, but not before another spray hit her sandals. She was covered. Hair, legs, that pink tank top, now a soggy mess. Coughing and gagging as she stumbled to the spigot and shut it off. I leaned back, sipping my coffee, savoring every second on the screen. This wasn't just revenge, this was art. She stood there, dripping, chest heaving, staring at the hose like it had betrayed her. Then her eyes snapped to my house. I ducked, instinct, but she was already storming over, sandals squelching, leaving a trail of sludge on the pavement. She banged on my door, hard enough to rattle the frame. I took a deep breath, set the mug down, and answered, casual as I could. She reeked. Oh man, she reeked, like a landfill on a hot day. "You," she sputtered, pointing a muddy finger. "You did this. This is assault, biohazard. I'll sue you into next year." Her voice cracked, half rage, half sob, her hair plastered to her face. I leaned on the doorframe, keeping my cool. "You dared me to do something," I said, shrugging. "So I did. You've been stealing my water for weeks. Figured I'd share something else." Her face went red, then green, then red again, like a traffic light on the fritz. "This isn't over," she hissed, stomping off, slipping once more on her own lawn. I waved, all friendly-like. "Tell the HOA the water wasn't stolen this time." She didn't look back, just disappeared inside, leaving her sprinkler spinning in the muck like a sad little trophy. I closed the door, grinning so wide my cheeks hurt. The app was still recording, neighbors gawking, Glenn shaking his head with a smirk, Tommy circling back on his scooter yelling "poop fountain" again. I saved the footage, every glorious minute, and sank onto the couch. The street was alive now, laughter, gasps, someone across the way filming with their phone. Karen's perfect little kingdom was a stinking wreck, and she'd done it to herself. I didn't feel bad, not one bit. She'd waved that hose at me, dared me, thought she could keep taking. Now she'd learn, mess with my water, get the sewer. Later, I checked the camera again. Her lawn chairs were brown, her roses drooping, her porch a disaster. The smell must have been biblical. I saw Mrs. Carter crack a window, then slam it shut fast. Glenn wandered over, still holding his coffee, and gave me a thumbs up through the blinds. "Nice one," he mouthed. I nodded back. The kid's "poop fountain" line stuck with me, a perfect title for the chaos. Karen thought she'd won with her bolt cutters and her HOA shrugs. She was wrong. This was my yard, my hose, my rules. And I wasn't done, not yet. She'd threatened lawsuits, sure, but I had the video, the neighbors, and a sewer tank on my side. Game on. The high from the sewage showdown didn't last long. I'd spent the rest of that day replaying the footage, Karen slipping in the muck, the poop fountain spinning like a filthy ballerina, Tommy's cackle echoing down the street. It was a masterpiece, a petty little symphony of justice, and I'd watched it with coffee in hand, grinning like I'd won the lottery. The neighbors were still buzzing. Glenn's thumbs up lingered in my mind, and I'd caught Mrs. Carter shaking her head through her window, half horrified, half amused. I figured Karen would slink off, lick her wounds, maybe hose herself down with her own water for once. I underestimated her. She wasn't the type to retreat, she was the type to double down, and she came back swinging. It started 3 days later. I was in the backyard, giving my tomato plant some long overdue love, clipping dead leaves, whispering apologies for neglecting it, when the mailman stuffed an envelope through the slot. Not the usual bills or junk flyers. This one was thick, official, with the HOA's logo stamped in the corner like a wax seal. I wiped my hands on my jeans, grabbed it, and tore it open, expecting maybe a "hey, good job" note for spicing up the neighborhood. Nope. It was a fine, $700, typed in bold, glaring at me like a slap. The letter was 3 pages long, crammed with words like violation, hazard, and immediate payment required. I sank onto the porch step, coffee forgotten inside, and read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. On March 19, 2025, it began, Nice of them to timestamp my revenge. Resident me was observed creating an environmental and health hazard via unauthorized sewage dispersal, impacting the property and well-being of a fellow homeowner. Karen's doing, no doubt. She'd spun the poop fountain into a full-on biohazard crisis, claiming I'd weaponized waste to endanger the community. The fine was for cleanup costs and HOA mediation fees, with a bonus lecture about upholding neighborhood standards. I laughed, couldn't help it. Standards? Like stealing my water was some noble tradition? But the laugh faded fast. $700 wasn't pocket change, and the HOA wasn't kidding around. Then came the kicker. Supporting evidence includes photographic documentation and statements from 2 witnesses. Witnesses? I squinted at the page, flipping to the back. Sure enough, blurry photos, her lawn chairs dripping brown, her roses sagging, plus 2 typed testimonies. One claimed I'd threatened to contaminate the street days before. The other said I'd laughed maniacally as it happened. Lies, pure and simple. I hadn't threatened anyone, and my laugh was more of a snort, tops. Karen had cooked this up, roped in some cronies, or invented them, to sell her sob story. I tossed the letter on the table, pacing the kitchen, the slow burn back in my gut. She wasn't just mad. She was playing dirty. I wasn't rolling over, though. If she wanted a paper war, I'd fight back. I grabbed my laptop, pulled up the HOA bylaws, dry as toast, but I skimmed until I hit gold. Section 4.2b. Any homeowner caught trespassing on another resident's property, particularly for the use of utilities without consent, will be subject to investigation, fines, and potential suspension of HOA privileges. Bingo. Karen's hose theft was a violation, multiple violations, and I had proof. I dug out my footage. The blurry Saturday wave, the kiddie pool taunt, the dawn raid with her dog. Timestamps, clear shots, her smug grin in every frame. I printed it all, stapled it with the water bill and a typed note. Karen's been stealing my water for weeks. Here's the evidence. Sewage was self-defense. I mailed copies to the HOA and slid a few under Glenn's door. He'd hinted at having her number 2. The neighborhood was already stirring. That evening, Glenn knocked, beer in hand, eyes glinting with mischief. Saw your package, he said, stepping inside. HOA's screwing you, huh? I showed him the fine. He whistled. 700? For that? Man, she's got pull, or she's nuts. I nodded. Both. She's claiming witnesses now. Glenn snorted. Witnesses? Only witness was that kid on the scooter, and he loved it. We laughed, but he got serious. She tried to fine me for my wind chimes once, said they disrupted her peace. I've had it with her. You fighting this? I tapped the bylaws printout. Damn right. He grinned. Good. I'll back you. Half the street will. She's been a pain since day one. Word spread fast. By the next morning, Mrs. Carter's daughter had texted me. Her mom was appalled by Karen, but secretly thrilled someone stood up. Another neighbor, a quiet guy named Phil, stopped me by the mailbox. Heard about the fine, he said, voice low. She yelled at my kid once for a lemonade stand. Unpermitted business, she called it. You've got my support. I thanked him, feeling the tide shift. Karen had enemies, more than I'd guessed, and my sewage stunt had lit a match under them. I wasn't alone anymore. This was turning into a quiet revolt, one fed-up neighbor at a time. But the HOA wasn't budging yet. I called their office, got bounced between 3 board members, each more bored than the last, until one finally spoke. We've received your materials, she droned. It'll be reviewed at the next special meeting. When? Next month. A month? I'd be out $700 by then, and Karen would be gloating from her stinky porch. I pushed, offered the full footage, timestamps, even the construction site's tank permit. We'll consider it, she said, then hung up. I stared at the phone, fuming. They were stalling, probably hoping I'd pay up and shut up. Karen knew how to play the system. Slow, bureaucratic, rigged in her favor. She'd turned my win into a waiting game. I wasn't waiting, though. That afternoon, I found a note slipped under my door, handwritten, all caps. This isn't over. You'll pay. Karen's cursive, sharp and angry, the same scrawl I'd seen on her HOA complaints about Glenn's truck. I laughed again, not scared, just amazed at her gall. She thought she'd cornered me with her fine and her fake witnesses. She didn't get it. I had videos, neighbors, a bylaw on my side. and a hose still hooked to a sewage tank. I tucked the note in my evidence pile, grinning. She wanted to escalate? Fine. I'd dig deeper, rally harder, hit back smarter. The HOA might have struck, but I wasn't down. Not yet. Karen's kingdom was cracking, and I was just getting started. Karen's note, "This isn't over. You'll pay," sat on my kitchen table like a bad omen, but it didn't scare me. It fueled me. She'd thrown down her fine, her fake witnesses, her HOA shield, thinking she could bury me in paperwork and guilt. She didn't count on me fighting back, not with fists or shouting, but with the kind of stubborn, quiet grind I'd used to keep that tomato plant alive through droughts and neglect. I had footage, bylaws, neighbors in my corner, and a sewer tank waiting in the wings. The HOA might have stalled me with their next month nonsense, but I wasn't waiting. I was ready to end this, and Karen's kingdom was about to topple. The special meeting came faster than expected. Word got around. Glenn said he'd nudged a board member at the gas station. Phil claimed he'd accidentally leaked the footage to a friend on the HOA, and suddenly, they bumped it up to a week out. I spent those days prepping like a lawyer in a TV drama, minus the slick suit. I printed more stills from the videos, Karen's dawn raid, the kiddie pool wave, the poop fountain in all its glory, stacked them with the water bills, the cut lock photos, and that golden bylaw about utility theft. I even typed up a timeline, neat and bullet-pointed, proving she'd trespassed at least 5 times. My dossier was thick, a paper brick of justice, and I mailed copies to the HOA with a note. "Review this before you fine me." I slid extras to Glenn and Phil too, just in case. The meeting wasn't public. HOA rules, go figure. But the street was electric that night. I watched from my window as Karen marched out, dressed like she was headed to court, black blazer, heels clicking, a folder tucked under her arm. She'd brought backup. 2 board members trailed her, one with a clipboard, the other looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I pictured her inside, waving her blurry photos, spinning tales of biohazards and maniacal laughter, her fake witnesses' words typed up in fancy font. But I had the truth, time-stamped, filmed, undeniable. Glenn texted me mid-meeting. "Heard she's yelling. Keep cool." I grinned, sipping coffee. Let her yell. Facts don't care about volume. Word trickled out by morning. Phil caught me by the mailbox, eyes gleaming. "They nailed her," he said, voice low like we were spies. "Fined her $600. Trespassing, utility theft, the works. Warned her one more stunt, and she's out of HOA perks." I blinked. Out. He nodded. No pool access, no voting rights, done. The board hadn't apologized to me. Too proud, probably, but the $700 fine vanished from my inbox that afternoon. No note, no sorry, just gone. Karen's allies crumbled too. One board guy resigned the next day, citing personal reasons. I didn't need an apology. The silence was enough. Her reign was cracking, and the street felt it. She wasn't done, though not quite. 2 days later, a city truck rolled up, an inspector in a polo shirt, clipboard in hand, looking bored. Karen had filed a complaint, claiming I'd illegally installed a sewage connection in my yard, a public health risk. I met him out front, hose coiled innocently by the spigot, and braced for a fight. He poked around, squinted at the buried line I'd barely covered with dirt, then laughed, full-on, belly-shaking laughed, for 5 straight minutes. "This," he said, wiping his eyes, "this ain't permanent. No valves, no permits violated, just a hose and some creativity." He scribbled something, still chuckling. "Off the record, I'd have done worse. She's lucky it wasn't dye." I offered him a water bottle. He waved it off, grinning. "Only if it's not from that hose." He left, report clean, and I exhaled. Another swing, another miss. That night, the moving truck showed up. No warning, no goodbye, just workers hauling out Karen's stuff. Potted plants, that pressure washer, a tacky pink flamingo she'd kept by her mailbox. She didn't wave, didn't yell, just slipped into her SUV and drove off, head down, sunglasses hiding her eyes. By week's end, her house was listed, for sale, motivated seller, and a young couple with a toddler snapped it up. They knocked the next day, all smiles, a plate of cookies in hand. "Hi, we're the new neighbors," the mom said. "Mind if we hook up our own hose? Don't want to bother yours." I nearly hugged them. Normal people, asking permission. I waved it off. "Use whatever you need, just not mine." They laughed, and I felt the air shift. Peace at last. Online, the saga hit a new peak. The poop fountain clip, someone else had posted it, filmed from Glenn's porch, passed 5 million views. Reddit dubbed me Ho's hero. TikTok looped it with dramatic music. A guy emailed about selling poop fountain justice t-shirts, but I passed. Too much spotlight. The neighborhood settled too. Glenn mowed my lawn one day. Unasked. A quiet thank you for taking her down. Mrs. Carter left a pie on my step, a sticky note saying, "You're a legend." I didn't feel legendary, just relieved. Karen's porch stayed dirty, her roses wilted, her hose untouched. She was gone, and the street breathed easier. But she left echoes. A week later, I got an email from a guy named Devin, 3 towns over. "Your video saved me," he wrote. "Karen's my new neighbor, already stealing my hose." Tips. I laughed, picturing her starting over. Same floral blouse, same smirk. I sent him the valve setup, camera brands, a playbook I jokingly called Karen Defense Protocol. He replied, "This means war." 2 days later, he emailed again. Karen, sprayed with compost tea, tumbling into her roses, kids on scooters howling. Karen's Revenge, Part 2, hit YouTube, and I cackled. She wasn't my problem anymore. She was everyone's, and the internet was ready. I stood in my yard that evening, watering my tomato plant, thriving now, finally, hose in hand, camera still up. The new couple's toddler giggled across the street, chasing a ball, no theft, no fines. The flamingo was gone, the shutters less smug. I'd won, not with noise or fury, but with proof and a sewer tank. Karen's fall was complete, fined, shamed, moved out. But I kept the valve rigged, the app on, the hose coiled like a quiet threat. She'd lost here, but people like her don't vanish, they regroup. If she ever came back, or someone else tried, I'd be ready. For now, though, I turned the spigot off, smiled at the silence, and let the peace sink in. Home again. Karen was gone, and the street felt like it could breathe again. No more sun hat bobbing across lawns, no more clipboard patrols, no more hoses snaking where they didn't belong. Her house sat empty for a blink, just long enough for the for sale sign to gather dust. Before the new couple moved in, their toddler's laughter replacing the tension that used to hang like fog. Mornings went back to what they'd been before. Me, coffee in hand, shuffling out to the porch in slippers that stayed dry. The only sound the chirp of birds or Glenn's truck grumbling to life. My yard was mine again. The spigot silent, the hose coiled like a retired soldier, its battle scars hidden under a fresh layer of dirt. Peace had returned, or at least the suburban version of it, where the biggest drama is a late trash pickup. The neighbors noticed too. Glenn started leaving his wind chimes up full time, their jingle drifting over like a victory anthem. Mrs. Carter's roses grew wilder, thorns and all, no one daring to complain. The new couple, Jen and Mike, I learned over those cookies, set up a sprinkler for their kid, hooked to their own water line, and waved at me every time they turned it on, like they were proving a point. One afternoon, someone left a gift on my porch, a shiny gold hose nozzle, no note, no name, just a silent salute from the shadows. I laughed, turning it over in my hands. A trophy, maybe, for the hose hero, or just a neighbor's way of saying thanks. I stuck it in the garage, next to the wrench and duct tape, a keepsake from the war I hadn't meant to start. Online, the saga wouldn't die. The poop fountain clip hit 6 million views, spawning memes. Karen slipping in slow-mo to opera music, captioned, "When you steal the wrong hose," and a Reddit thread debating best neighbor revenge ever. Strangers messaged me, some thanking me for the laugh, others asking how to rig their own traps. I didn't reply much, fame's not my thing, but I couldn't ignore Devin's updates. His Karen's Revenge, Part 2, with the compost tea spray had gone viral too, kids on scooters dubbing her Mud Lady this time. He emailed me a week later. "She's complaining about my mailbox now, too red. Sending you a t-shirt." It arrived days later, black with Hose Justice in bold white letters. I wore it once, mowing the lawn, and Glenn gave me a nod like I'd joined a secret club. The street kept healing. Glenn invited me over for a barbecue one Saturday, first time I'd been to his place, a cluttered backyard with a grill that smoked like a chimney. He flipped burgers, beer in hand, and grinned. "You took her down, man. Whole block owes you." Phil showed up too, his kid tagging along with a lemonade cup, unpermitted and proud. Mrs. Carter's daughter dropped by with a pie, whispering, "Mom says you're a saint." I shrugged it off. I didn't feel saintly, just stubborn, but the chatter was warm, easy, the kind of thing Karen's rain had choked out. We ate, laughed, swapped stories about her antics. The wind chimes, the roses, Phil's lemonade stand. The flamingo came up too. Someone swore she'd yelled at it once for leaning wrong. By dusk, the air smelled of charcoal and relief, and I walked home thinking maybe I'd done more than save my water bill. I couldn't let it just fade, though, not fully. The saga had legs, and people kept reaching out. So I started a blog, Suburban Showdowns. Nothing fancy, just a free site with a plain template. I wrote up the whole mess. The wet lawn, the lock, the poop fountain, Karen's fall. No names, just the hose queen, and me as the guy next door. I posted the videos, blurred her face, kept it legal, and added a form for others to send their own tales. Within days, it blew up. A woman in Ohio wrote about her neighbor stealing her Wi-Fi to stream karaoke. A guy in Texas shared how he'd spiked his mailbox with glitter to catch a package thief. Each story was a little rebellion, a middle finger to petty tyrants, and I paired them with tips, cameras, bylaws, creative traps. Readers dubbed it the Karen Playbook, and I ran with it, selling hose justice shirts on the side. Not for cash, just to spread the vibe. The best part wasn't the views or the shirts, though. It was quieter. One afternoon, I was out back, trimming hedges that had gotten shaggy during the chaos, when I heard it. Laughter, real and loud, cutting through the stillness. I peeked over the fence. Jen and Mike were chasing their toddler, Lily, through their sprinkler, clean water, their hose, no theft. She squealed, bare feet slapping wet grass, while they dodged sprays, grinning like kids themselves. No fines, no clipboard, just a family doing what families do. I leaned on my clippers, watching, and felt something settle. That was the win. Not the viral clip, not Karen's exit, but this. A street where hoses stayed put and laughter didn't come with a catch. I kept the gear, though, the valve switch, the camera, the sewage line still buried, just in case. Karen was gone, but people like her don't vanish. They slink off, regroup, wait. Devon's emails proved it. She'd landed 3 towns over, already stirring trouble. I pictured her dragging someone's hose again, oblivious to the mud lady, fame trailing her like a stink cloud. If she ever came back, or if a new Karen rose up, I'd be ready. The app stayed on my phone, beeping at squirrels now instead of thieves. The hose sat by the spigot, shiny and tempting, a trap waiting to spring. Not that I wanted it to, I liked the quiet. But peace isn't free, and I'd learned that the hard way. That evening, I grabbed the hose, gold nozzle still in the garage, too flashy for daily use, and watered my tomato plant. It was thriving now, leaves green, a few red buds peeking out like tiny medals. I turned the spigot slow, letting the water soak in, no audience, no war. Across the street, Lily's giggles faded as Jen called her in for dinner. Glenn's wind chimes clinked. The air smelled of wet earth, not sewage. I shut it off, coiled the hose, and stood there, coffee mug empty on the porch. It was ridiculous. A plastic tube and some water pressure had unraveled a tyrant, united a street, and turned me into a legend I didn't ask to be. Poetic, in a messy, stinky way. I smiled, slipped inside, and locked the door. Home again. Really home, and ready for whatever came next. So, that's the tale of the hose queen and me, the guy who fought back with a sewer tank and a camera. If you've stuck with me this long, through the puddles, the poop fountain, and Karen's meltdown, thanks. Seriously, you're the real heroes, slogging through my suburban soap opera like it's your own backyard. Loved it. Drop a comment on the blog. Tell me your own Karen stories. The crazier the better. I read every one, and the best might make it into the next Suburban Showdowns post. Better yet, share this with your friends. Spread the hose justice gospel so they know what to do when their own water bill spikes. And if you're hooked, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Keeps you in the loop for whatever madness comes next. I'm not done yet. Neither are the Karens out there. Stay tuned. Keep your hoses locked, and let's keep the fight alive, one spigot at a time.